What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. Mtg. We like it in Magic. By now you've been stopping by for spoiler season. Thanks for that. If you didn't catch yesterday's video, check that out. Link in the description. I was in a really good mood for that video. There's a lot of really good stuff in yesterday's batch. Today, I'm not quite as impressed, just to keep it real with you, but there's some good stuff in here, so let's check it out. All right, well, let's get warmed up here. Go ahead and get our stretches in with some commons that came out this morning that look pretty good for the limited environment. A couple of these might actually transcend into exactly the right standard deck. We'll see, but let's get things started with Invading Manticore. This is 6 mana, 5 and a red for a 4/5 zombie Manticore, and when it ETBs, you amass 2. I like this for sealed specifically. Yesterday I was talking about a 6 mana Leviathan in blue, and I said that I liked it. It's not so bad. It's actually relatively inexpensive for sealed specifically. And a bunch of people hit me in the comments, understandably so, because just the other day I went on kind of a rant against 6-drops in Constructed. The context is way different when you're talking about these two environments. You might die to aggro on turn 4 or 5 in Constructed, and if you do get your 6-drop against control, it's likely to get countered. And that's why one of the reasons Carnage Tyrant was actually played in Standard, since it's one of the few 6-drops that isn't a valid argument against. So as far as sealed goes, however, it's a much slower environment. Everyone's just looking to get to their big bomb. You're much more likely to get to these game-ending 6-drops, and this is really good once you do get your 6 land in sealed. You get 2 bodies some of the time. Sometimes you just make an existing army even bigger, which is fine. It's not bad at all. But the prospect of 2 bodies and 6 power across those 2 bodies is actually pretty good in the sealed environment specifically. So I'd look out for this to fill the top of my curve if I was playing red at the pre-release. But again, there might be better options depending on if you get like a bomb rare or something like that. But as far as I can tell, especially at the common level, this is a good, finishing card for a red deck in sealed. But let's move on here to Liza Templating Behemoth, and there's really not much to say about this, other than it's a hippo. We also saw Sorin's Thirst today. Speaking of decent limited cards, don't like that this costs double black. Sometimes you won't get that in limited until turn, 4 on occasion. In which case, this loses a little bit of value, but it's still a good removal spell for all intents and purposes and catches you back up a little bit. We've seen this card plenty of times in different forms. Like, for instance, in Standard, we have Moment of Craving, which is just a much better card until it rotates in the fall. Also at the common level, we got Nakiri's Stone Blades. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for an instant. Up to 2 target creatures each get +2/+0 until end of turn. So you get like a Blades of Veles Veil without the tribal payoff. This is actually historically really good in the limited environment, because if 2 creatures get through, you can get 4 extra damage for 2 at instant speed, a great combat trick, or you can, use it in other versatile ways. One of the best ways to use it is when 2 creatures get blocked by creatures that would otherwise kill them. You basically just get this huge blowout. You might still lose your guys, but you're going to kill much bigger guys blocking them than you had any business doing that. And of course, you can also use this to get 1 creature through for more damage and make another creature kill somebody on blocks he wouldn't have otherwise killed. So Blades is always a pretty useful limited combat trick, and I wouldn't mind running 1 or 2 of these if I was going specifically very aggressive in draft. But maybe my favorite of the commons that were spoiled today is Liza Templating Reaver. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 1/2 zombie beast, and when it enters the battlefield, you amass 1. There's a lot to like about this little guy. Yeah, I'm showing my face for this one. I think it's that impactful, In just the right deck, this could show up. Maybe an Aristocrats deck wants this because it puts 2 bodies on the battlefield. On turn 2, you get 2/3 worth of stats, but it in some ways is even better because you do get it on 2 bodies. That's more sacrifice fodder, that's more chump blocking, whatever you're trying to do, And even if you get this in the late game, you already have an army out, putting a +1/+1 counter on the army ain't half bad either. So I like a little bit about this card. I think it's a decent way to start the game in a lot of formats, not just standard, not just sealed or limited. In those formats, it seems pretty good in the Amass deck, obviously, or even outside of the Amass deck. There's a pretty strong limited piece, especially, again, at the common level. I like that an awful lot. Being able to get, 2 of these in your seal pool, pretty sweet when you're trying to fill out the 2-drop slot. But in Standard, again, in just the right deck, this might be in. The Aristocrats deck already has plenty of 2-drops that it wants to play, But maybe if you're doing a more budget thing or you're just building budget Amass in Standard, this might be the best 2-drop you have access to. Let's move up to the uncommons here so we can take a look at Leyline Prowler. One of the most important things about this card is one of the words in its name. But it's actually a really solid card, too. 3 mana, 1 a black and a green for a 2/3 Nightmare Beast with Death Touch and Lifelink. This is reminding me of something. You can also just tap it for a mana of any color. This is all kinds of good in limited. I mean, we're seeing a lot of good limited stuff. You know, I told you at the beginning of the video I'm not as impressed with today's patch. But if you're looking at the limited environment, if you're that kind of player, then today was kind of your day. You got to see a lot of bread and butter stuff. This is definitely it if you're in black and green. You know, it's kind of a sort of a vampire Nighthawk, a nightmare Nighthawk. Kind of, you know, it doesn't have the flying or anything, but being able to tap for a mana of any color is actually a pretty utility ability. Not only does it fix your mana if you're in 3 colors, or even if you're in just the 2, it'll help fix your mana, get, you know, that second color of, you know, black or green, which is going to be pretty important some of the time. You know, it'll ramp you as well, and I don't have to tell you that's good. But just the ability to, you know, be so good, whether it's on defense or offense, threatens really hard when it does attack in. If you leave it up on defense, it can sometimes stop like 2 or 3 dudes in and of itself. So this is a really powerful card for limited. Also, by the way, before we get out of here on this card, I'd be remiss if I didn't just sort of in passing mention. That's how I should say this sentence. English, right, Dev? Anyway, in passing, I should mention that it's going to be good with that new Vraska and sort of the Death Touch deck, you know? I didn't really like the uncommon Vraska that much, and Vraska is one of my favorite planeswalkers, which lent to my not liking of it. But anyway, obviously, if you follow this on turn 3 into Vraska on turn 4, then you're doing something for yourself. It's not so bad, and that's probably going to form the basis of a budget deck you'll see right here on this dang channel. So tune in for that. I just wanted to bring up that interaction, but aside from even that interaction, this is a pretty solid card, and that's self-evident. But here is some real business. This is Liza Templating right here, ladies and gentlemen. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant. You amass 1, first of all, and then you and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. Well, here's a sneaky way to counter a Banefire. That's, if nothing else, this makes, you know, that makes this a pretty decent little sideboard card. If people are really going to go off on Banefire the way I keep seeing on Reddit and in comment sections, everyone's like, "Oh, Banefire's crazy. Banefire, Wilderness Reclamation, plus that new Teferi, it's going to be crazy." I don't know if that's the truth, but just in case it is, and the Wilderness Reclamation deck just goes completely off the rails, this is a pretty decent safeguard against that, and it also effectively counters Explosion while you're at it. But it doesn't stop there. You know, this is kind of a negate for tempo decks in a way, you know. It's, in some ways, it just stops a creature from being targeted by a removal spell. It also stops you from being targeted by a Settle the Wreckage. So there's a lot of utility on this, a little bit more versatility than it looks like at first. This is subtly a really, really good card in what are slightly more than edge situations. I was going to call them edge situations, but really, these are situations and play lines that get run into in Standard all the time. So I think this is a great sideboard card, if nothing else. I was going to be done there, but I haven't even talked about the body yet. Let me just, this also, it's like a heroic intervention. Minus Indestructible plus a body. And I'd really rather have the Indestructible, you know. That would be much better against like Kaya's Wrath, and I could sit here and name, you know, board wipes all day that I'd rather have the Indestructible against. But still, a body is not half bad either. So if, you know, you're countering, let's say, a Wizard's Lightning, you know, you're at 5 or something like that, and you're trying to claw back into the game and establish control. You counter a Wizard's Lightning, put a body on the battlefield to block. That seems like a pretty good line to me too, so don't discount the body on this. But here's another high-impact uncommon from today. This is Deathsprout. 4 mana, 1, 2 black, and a green for an instant. Destroy target creature. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Grassassin's Trophy. I can do better than that. Assassin's Topiary. There's got to be something there. But anyway, this is kind of an anti-Assassin's Trophy, you know? You kill a guy, then you go and get a land from your library. That's pretty good. Apparently that's worth 2 more mana, and it might be. You know, it's kind of a, you could do like a control-y ramp deck with a card like this. I don't necessarily like 4 mana to only be able to target creatures. A little down on that, but it is at least instant speed, and the ramp is super relevant, you know, if you're playing, you know, a 3 or more color deck for that matter. This kind of fixing is going to be amazing, and it's going to, you know, pump you up to a 5-drop on the next turn. If you're able to drop a land, then this gets you directly to a 6-drop on your next turn when you untap, so, or, you know, when you untap and draw a card, whatever, you drop a land. It can get you up to 6, and that might be extremely relevant too for discounting any arguments I may have made about 6-drops. We'll see. I really like this card. I'm not sure in the end that it's destined for standard play, because we do have Assassin's Trophy and Vraska's Contempt and all other, manner of better black and green removal spells right now. You can just play Cast Down or something. And usually a lower mana cost is worth it when compared to a 4-mana card. But again, if you're playing mostly at instant speed anyway in your weird Golgari or perhaps Sultai control deck, then this is definitely a key consideration. I can see this card being really good. But up next, everybody, here's Ferrous Statues. 6 mana for a legendary artifact. Spells your opponent's cast cost 2 more to cast, and at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 1 life. Oh boy! I guess I'm not really that excited about this card. I'm not seeing it. It costs 6 mana to cast, so by the time you get it out, especially in a constructed environment, like Standard specifically, that first ability just isn't as important most of the time. Like, what are you keeping them off of? They're 5 and 6 drops for the most part, but that's only like a few of the spells in their deck most of the time, so I don't know how important that is. I guess you're keeping them off of, like, storming out in one way or another. If you're playing against some sort of blue-red Drake's deck, you don't want them casting all of the spells. I kind of get it, but I still think that 6 mana is way too much for this effect, and that, again, is self-evident on a card like this. They made it uncommon, which is your first clue that it's not the most powerful legendary artifact in the world or anything. And on top of all that, you get an ill-gotten inheritance. 1 whole damage a turn, and you can't even have multiple copies of it out. So, yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. I understand the flavor is hilarious. A few different ways. Like, this is what Fibblethip was standing on and totally lost. It wasn't Ugin like we may have thought at first glance. So I think there's some cool stuff flavor-wise. Obviously, this lends to the story a great deal. And it does actually beg the question, like 150 years from now, when Ravnica's rebuilding, are there going to be some Ravnicans that are like, that's a statue of a brutal dictator, we should tear that thing down, and then other Ravnicans are going to be like, I don't know, it is our heritage. But up next here, we got Single Combat. 5 mana, 3 and 2 white for a sorcery. Each player chooses a creature or planeswalker they control, then sacrifices the rest. Players can't cast creatures or planeswalker spells until the end of your next turn. I hate the word players on this. That means that you can't do it. You can't cast creatures or planeswalkers or anything either. They get to rebuild their board first. For all intents, you might have to wait a little bit longer to get to that conclusion, but the conclusion is still the same. And on top of that, there's the fact that, like, I've never liked sweepers like this in the first place. Whenever you have a sweeper that lets them keep their best thing, it's usually bad. As far as like anti-Super Friends tech, that's probably, where this card fits the most. It could see a sideboard slot if Super Friends is such an important deck in the next format and people are playing, 24 Planeswalkers in their deck. Then yeah, I'll concede that I could see this seeing some play. But as it is, the only thing I really like about this card is the flavor. It's hilarious to me because it implies that these two, when Sorin and Nahiri fight, it kills everybody else. Everybody in the immediate area. The intensity of their fight. It's like Becky and Rhonda. And I wish Fibblethip was in this art so he could be Charlotte. He doesn't really add much to the confrontation. But as far as, these two's fight just being so intense that the surrounding area is just decimated. Like, I love how anime that is. But up next, let's get to another rare that I don't particularly like. I gotta go ahead and tell you that, but I will give you, this card is very interesting. Here's Storev Dev Karen Lich. Dev ain't caring too much about this card. Anyway, I just wanted to make that joke. 4 mana, 1, 2 black and a green for a 5/4 legendary zombie elf wizard. Some good creature types there. With Trample. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, return to your hand target creature or planeswalker card in your graveyard that wasn't put there this combat. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that the phrase "this combat" is mostly to keep you from returning this to your hand. If it dies in combat, it still tramples over for damage, And I think that the trample is actually the most important part of this card because it's going to make it so much easier to actually deal combat damage to a player or a planeswalker. So again, I will give you that about the card too. I think that if you can get an attack step in with this, it's fairly likely that you'll do some damage and be able to recur something, at which point the card has given you the requisite value that you're looking for, and it's a pretty decent card. But I think I would probably just rather play Golgari Finebroker and go ahead and get a thing back as soon as it ETBs and have like more of a spread of options as far as what I can get back. I think Fine Broker is probably the better card, but this is the much bigger body, the much bigger threat, and it's a lot easier to actually get through with combat damage for what that's worth. But if you want the immediate value, which in, competitive Magic is usually the better choice, I'd probably just go Fine Broker. But I know what you come for. Let's get to these Planeswalkers here. We got Sauron, Vengeful Bloodlord first. 4 mana, 2 a black and a white for 4 loyalty Planeswalker. As long as it's your turn, creatures and Planeswalkers you control have lifelink. You can +2 Sauron to have it deal 1 damage to target player or Planeswalker, or you can -X Sauron to return target creature with converted mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature is vampire in addition to its other types. I really want to like this Sauron, because Sauron is another one of my favorite Planeswalkers. Sauron is so cool to me. So I really wanted to like Sauron, but I do have issues. However, there are plenty of things I like about this card. I think this could catch you up or put you over the top in a sort of aggro versus aggro matchup, an aggro mirror. I think that this is really good to drop on turn 4, give all your dudes lifelink, and a big swing in. That said, there's a little bit of tension on that. If you +2 Sauron, first of all, the plus ability is horrendous. Let's just say it for what it is. Yeah, you get a damage every turn, so this is technically a win condition if you just plus it every single turn, but, again, it's just an ill-gotten inheritance at that point. That card's not very good. I love it, but let's face facts, it's not very good. The best, the money on this is the recursion ability and the lifelink. But again, there's some tension. Let me go back to that. I was trying to explain that and got sidetracked because I'm diagnosed ADD. But in any case, the tension on this is that if you plus Sauron, he hasn't really protected himself at all. You need creatures to stay up and block for him. Yeah, you'll go up to 6 loyalty the first turn he's in play. That's a pretty good loyalty count. But at the same time, you're not actually protecting him if you swing in with all of your guys. On the crackback, Sauron's likely to die. So there is some tension here. And I kind of like that, but at the same time, it's infuriating. But the business end of this is the recursion ability, especially if you've gotten a plus or 2 in. You're probably not going to do too much cheating a huge thing into play on turn 4 or anything like that. But on turn 5, 6, 7, suddenly, if you're able to bend something that cost a lot in the early game or in the mid game, then you can get some real value out of this. But honestly, even if you immediately use the minus ability right when he enters the battlefield on like a 2 casting cost creature, similar to like how you'd use a Johnny Adversary of Tyrants, then this is also a good card, but you'd probably rather just use a Johnny in that case. That said, this can reanimate bigger stuff than a Johnny, and I think that's a huge deal, especially given that whatever you reanimate has lifelink on your turn too. So that's cool. There's a lot to this card. Some things that make me like it and some things that make me hate it. I'd say the only thing I don't really like, though, trying to talk myself into this card as I go, is the +2. It adds a lot of loyalty, and I like that, but 1 damage to a player or Planeswalker just isn't very impactful. Even, given the fact that it was probably balanced this way, because the other 2 abilities, the static ability and the minus ability, are in fact very, very good and could easily lend to some sort of standard play. But I'm very adverse to that plus ability. It's just not very impactful at all. Man, I'm talking fast this video. I got a head full of coffee, guys. Sorry. But anyway, here's Nakiri, Storm of Stone. Best thing about the card is its name. That's an awesome after comma, epithet. But anyway, 4 mana, 2, and then 2 hybrid Boros mana for a 6 loyalty Planeswalker. And as long as it's your turn, there's that phrase again, creatures you control have first strike and equip abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate. You can -X Nahiri to have Storm of Stone deal X damage to target tapped creature. Now, I find it interesting the way that they made these 2 walkers. It's such a rivalry, but they're actually really similar in a few ways. Obviously they both cost 4 mana, and they both, start with the same loyalty, and they both have negative X abilities, and they both have as long as it's your turn abilities. They really designed these in very similar ways. And aside from just the obvious design notes, they have a similar tension. You get an on your turn combat ability, like all your dudes get first strike, but if you swing in, then you haven't really protected your Nahiri, and her -X ability that looks like decent removal is also kind of bad in a deck where you want to play a bunch of creatures. It doesn't actually take out blockers or help you get through in that way. It might help you win an aggro war or a race, And that's cool, but for the most part, stuff that kills, tapped creatures isn't necessarily good in aggro decks, because aggro decks are mostly using to, trying to use removal spells to get rid of blockers. So a similar tension as well on this card. And it's probably not, this is probably worse than Sorin, all things considered. But I will say, you can play this in mono red, you can play this in mono white, and there might be some interesting things you can do in those decks with a card like that. Especially given some of the equipment that we do have in Standard. I think that's probably the only deck you're actually going to see this in, is one that can take advantage of that, equipment clause there. But aside from that, I'm not quite seeing this one. This next card, I got to do a little translating for you, but I actually saved this card for last, so I think it might be the best card of the day. Let me explain here. It's Krinko, the Boss of 10th Street. That's 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 1/2 legendary goblin. And whenever it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens where X is equal to Krinko's power. Now, the only thing I don't like about this card is what I've been saying about a couple of other creatures. Not only this video, but the spoiler season in general, and that I don't necessarily care for creatures that you have to wait until the next turn to get any real value out of. A 3 mana 1/2 that doesn't do anything until you untap is technically a pretty bad card when you're evaluating for constructed, but the value goes absolutely out of control if you can get this through even once. You don't even really have to get it through, it just only has to attack. In which point it gets the counter, you get a goblin, it doesn't actually have to deal combat damage, and that sweetens the pot an awful lot. Now the reason that I think I like this so much, again, this is one that has to be labbed, but that's kind of a point in its favor. You can't just write this card off immediately. I think that there is testing that needs to be done here, because I think that it wins the boss battle. You could either in the 3-drop slot, in goblins, but any red deck for that matter, you could either play Legion War Boss, or you play this. You play Goblin Chain Whirler no matter what. That's pretty much a set slot in a lot of red decks. But maybe you don't have all the red mana in the world to cast Goblin Chain Whirler, yada, yada, yada. I think this is a great choice for the 3-drop slot, again, especially over a card like War Boss, because I think that this card's ability to take over the game and snowball out of control as things go on is just way better than War Boss's. And that's not even mentioning the presence of pump spells, anthem effects and such. You got a trash master out or something like that, and you got an anthem effect on this guy, then suddenly he gets even bigger. Creates more goblins. So, or just a pump spell again. Collision Colossus, Giant Growth is in this format. We just saw that Samet Strike the other day, +2/+1 and haste and scry 1 for 1 mana. Any pump spell like that. We just saw that new Blades of Vela's Veil. You see what I'm getting at here? Any way you can increase this thing's power, and there are a ton of ways, is going to just lead to more goblins and more power. So I really like what this card can do. Given that you can get 1 or 2 attack steps in with it, it's just going to snowball and sometimes win the game by itself. And it can be especially good when resolved against control. If you can protect it, this can just spin, completely off the rails and end up winning you the game all by itself. And that might sound outlandish to some people, but you might not remember Goblin Rabble Master, which was basically the same casting cost and very reminiscent of Krinko. My coffee's done. That's going to be delicious. I need more coffee. And you can tell I'm head full of the stuff in this video. I'm talking super fast. But in any case, I just want to communicate how much I like this card, how much it reminds me of Rabble Master. Because when War Boss came out, we were like, oh, this is a new Goblin Rabble Master, you guys. And it has seen some play, but it hasn't necessarily lived up to Rabble Master's legacy. And I think that Krinko has a chance. And oh, by the way, Krinko's back. That's awesome, yes. That's actually all the spoilers for today so far. It's about 3:15 as I record this. I'm trying to figure out the right balance this season, because cards aren't just done at 2 or 3 in the afternoon like they used to be. Sometimes they'll release cards at 6, 7 o'clock at night, and it really throws things off, so you have to find the exact right time to record and edit and all that. But if they do spoil any more cards while I'm editing, I'll make sure I get back in the booth, get on the mic, talk about those for you. But just in case I don't see you again today, I will be back tomorrow. I can promise you that. They're going to be doing spoilers all week. They might take the weekend off. They often do that, but I'll be here with you guys pretty much all week for those. So if I don't see you later on tonight, I'll guarantee I'll see you tomorrow. But just let me know how you felt about all these. What am I off base on? Do you maybe like that, Golgari Legend more than I did, or either one of the Planeswalkers more than I did? For the record, I like Sorin. I want to like Sorin a lot. I think that has potential, but Nahiri, Not so much, but just let me know how you feel about all the stuff. Give me your opinions. I want to know. So, aside from that, just make sure you do YouTube things. You're an adult, you know, but unless you're not. Even if you're not, you've probably been on YouTube your entire life, so you know by now. Just take a little bit of time, hit the like button, thumbs up the video, helps me out a lot. Puts me in more recommended feeds, gives more people spoilers. Everybody wins, so do that stuff. Subscribe if you haven't done it yet. I just learned last night that about a third of my views, 33%, come from people who aren't subscribed. It's like, what are you doing? Hit subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, because you watch me anyway. Make sure that you're notified when I actually release videos. So, aside from that, I guess you can check out TCG Play at a sponsored content. They're actually a pretty good price guide right now. For all, pre-orders on these singles as they release, as people, get a barometer on sort of how the community feels about these cards, their prices will go up and down. And it's a really interesting thing to kind of keep watch on. So even if you don't plan on pre-ordering anything, it might be cool to click the link and just kind of see where the community is price-wise on what's been spoiled so far. But aside from that, follow me on Twitter, SBMTGDev. Link to the Patreon down there if you really want to help keep the channel alive, because AdSense is not how you want to make a living. It's not good lately, guys. So if you want to help keep the channel alive, which is, every YouTuber says that, but I really, really, really love my job, and I'll probably do it even if I only make like $100 a month. Make a completely unsustainable amount of money that I can't even pay rent with. I'll probably still try and do this. So, I mean, it would be lying if I said keep the channel alive. But honestly, if you want to help support the channel, because I know I'm worth it, throw $1 a month into the Patreon pot, and you can vote on what decks you want to see this coming up deck tech season. So give you some clout for $1 every 30 days. But aside from that, I'm pretty sure I am done ranting about myself. So tell me about yourself in the comment section. How do you feel about all these cards? It's your turn. But anyway, done for now, you guys. I've been Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Catch you cats next time. Spread love and be kind.